Floods are among the most destructive forces on Earth. They tear through homes, wash away fields, and can erase entire cities. But what if there was a flood so massive and powerful it could wipe out the whole world? Many people believe this actually happened long ago. The story is best known from the Bible's account of Noah's Ark, but it also exists far beyond it. To understand those old stories, it helps to see the world the way ancient people saw it. Thousands of years ago, when someone said the whole earth, they didn't mean the planet. They often meant the lands they knew and ruled, which was usually just their own country and nearby neighbors. People measured distance by how far they could walk in a day or sail in a week. Their world was only as big as the places they could reach. If that land flooded, everything they knew was gone. The land itself could make the illusion worse. Flat floodplains stretch so wide that when riverbanks break, water spreads like a shallow sea. Old languages added to the confusion. In the Hebrew Bible, the word Eretz could mean many things. It could mean the planet, a region, a country, or simply the ground under your feet, depending on the context. Sometimes the floods went far past the places people knew. When rivers joined or the sea moved inland, whole regions went under. To the people who lived there, it must have felt as if the whole world had drowned. So when an old text says all the earth, it doesn't have to mean the entire world. It means the whole world as they knew it. That is how a flood that covered only a few kingdoms could become remembered as the flood that ended everything. People from every part of the world have told stories that sound almost the same. The Chinese spoke of a hero who stopped a great flood. The Sumerians wrote about a man named Ziusudra who built a large boat and survived. In India, the story of Manu tells of a man warned by a fish to build an ark. The Aztecs, the Greeks, and the Norse all remembered a time when the world was covered in water and only a few people survived. Each story follows the same pattern. The world is flooded, the gods or nature are angry, one person or family builds a vessel, and life starts over again afterward. These stories came from different parts of the world, but they are almost the same. Maybe that's just coincidence, or maybe people were remembering a real event, a massive flood that covered everything they knew, and survivors who passed that story down through time. Some stories go further than old flood tales, saying the same waters destroyed great civilizations that today exist only as mysteries. The most famous of these is Atlantis, a mighty island nation said to have sunk beneath the sea in one terrible day and night. Plato wrote about it more than 2,000 years ago. He said Atlantis was a rich and advanced kingdom that was punished by the gods with water and fire. Many people believe this story could be a memory of a real place destroyed when the seas rose at the end of the Ice Age. Some researchers think that place might be the Richat structure in the Sahara Desert, also called the Eye of the Sahara. From above, it looks like giant rings of stone, wide circles that match the shape Plato described for the city of Atlantis. It sits in what is now one of the driest places on Earth, but ancient riverbeds around it show that it was once covered in water. To some, this is proof that Atlantis wasn't a myth at all, but a real city that was buried and dried by time. Others speak of a lost world called Lemuria or Mu, a land that once stretched across the Indian or Pacific Ocean before it sank below the waves. Ancient stories from India tell of Kumari Kandam, a great southern kingdom said to be swallowed by the sea long ago. Off the coast of modern-day India, divers have found the remains of stone walls and streets near the city of Dwarka. Some believe these ruins show where an ancient city once stood before being drowned by the rising ocean. Farther north, legends talk about Tartaria, said to be a vast and advanced empire that covered much of Eurasia. According to this idea, a sudden flood or mud flood buried entire cities, leaving only the tops of buildings and towers above the ground. Old maps and strange layers of earth in ancient towns are sometimes pointed to as evidence of this forgotten civilization. Whether Atlantis, Tartaria, or Lemuria ever truly existed, the idea behind them is the same. Each story tells of a time when water came suddenly and erased everything people had built. It is possible that these legends all trace back to the same event, a flood so huge that it ended one age of humanity and began another. When water covers the land for a long time, it leaves its mark behind. Stone, brick, and metal all carry scars of where the water stood. In many old buildings and monuments, there are straight lines or changes in color that look like the edge of an ancient sea. Some believe these marks are proof of a great flood that reached across continents. At the Great Pyramid of Giza, there is a clear change in the surface stone about halfway up. The lower part looks rough and worn, while the upper part is cleaner and smoother. Some researchers say this difference could have been caused by long exposure to water and waves. They call it the waterline, the level where the flood once rested before the land dried again. Similar patterns can be seen on cliffs, temples, and old towers around the world. The stone looks eaten away in bands, as if waves once lapped against it for years. In some places, these lines match ancient sea levels found in geological records. The Washington Monument even has photographs showing what a floodline would look like on its surface, giving us a modern example of how water leaves its signature. Others say these lines are not from floods at all, but from darker stones brought from a different quarry when construction stopped for many years. Rain, pollution, and time also may have darkened the lower part more than the top. In some buildings, repairs or cleaning have left lighter and darker sections that look like watermarks. Moisture and humidity can also stain the stone near the ground, where it stays damp longer. These lines can cause debate. Some people say they're not from floods at all, and to others, they're proof of great floods long ago. When a strong flood covers the land, it spreads a thin, even layer of mud, silt, and clay. To an archaeologist digging thousands of years later, that layer looks like a clean line dividing one period of life from another. Scientists can date these layers using small pieces of burned wood, seeds, or bone. Sand grains can show when they were last exposed to sunlight. Beneath the flood layer, they often find dry soil with cracks and roots, proving the land was once dry. Some flood layers stretch for many miles, showing that entire regions were underwater at the same time. For a long time, scientists believed landscapes changed slowly, shaped only by wind and rain over millions of years. That view changed in the early 1900s when geologist J. Harlan Bretz studied the dry canyons of the Pacific Northwest. He found giant ripple marks, deep channels, and valleys stripped empty. The only explanation was a flood far greater than anyone had imagined. The water came from glacial Lake Missoula, a massive lake held in place by a wall of ice. When that ice dam broke, it released a wave of water that tore through the land, carving canyons and cliffs in just days. At a place now called Dry Falls, the floodwater rushed past at over 300 million cubic feet per second. Niagara Falls, by comparison, moves at only about 200,000. After Bretz proved what happened, scientists began to notice signs of similar megafloods in many other parts of the world. The evidence was clear. Not all landscapes were shaped slowly. Some were changed suddenly, by floods powerful enough to rewrite the surface of the earth. The first great cities rose along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where yearly floods brought rich soil for crops and easy routes for trade. But those same rivers could turn deadly. When they flooded, they covered towns in layers of mud and clay, hiding tools, footprints, and even homes beneath the silt. In the ancient cities of Ur and Shuruppak, archaeologists have found thick layers of clean clay between older and newer homes. These were flood deposits left behind after the rivers overflowed. The people who lived there had to rebuild their cities many times. A single massive storm could destroy everything. Streets and canals would fill with mud, walls would soften, and roofs would collapse. When the water finally drained away, the survivors flattened the ruins and built their homes again on top of the dried mud. Over hundreds of years, the city grew layer by layer, each layer a reminder of a flood that came before. At the end of the last ice age, the world began to change quickly. The giant ice sheets started to melt, and sea levels rose by almost 400 feet. Valleys filled with water, and the coastlines of every continent shifted. Doggerland once connected Britain to mainland Europe. It was a wide plain with forests, rivers, and small settlements. Over time, it disappeared under the rising waters of the North Sea. Fishermen still find animal bones, stone tools, and antlers from that lost land on the seafloor. Farther east, The Persian Gulf was once a large river valley. As the ocean moved inland, wells turned salty, farms flooded, and the old roads became channels of water between new islands. To the north, the Black Sea also changed dramatically. Samples taken from the bottom of the sea show a clear change in color and material: dark mud from freshwater below, bright layers of saltwater shells above. This shows that at one point, the sea suddenly turned from fresh to salty. One theory says the Mediterranean Sea broke through a natural barrier and poured into the lower Black Sea basin, flooding villages in its path. Others think the flooding happened more slowly, but still forced people to move year after year. Either way, whole communities saw their homes disappear beneath the rising water. Those memories could have been passed down through generations until they became the flood legends we still tell today. Some scientists also believe that the Ice Age itself could be linked to these events. For so much of the planet to be covered in ice, there needed to be both cold air and huge amounts of moisture. Catastrophic floods could have added heat and energy to the oceans, creating powerful storms that brought massive snowfall. If that is true, then the Great Flood was not only a disaster but also the beginning of the Ice Age that followed. Around 12,800 years ago, the Earth went through a sudden and dramatic change. After many centuries of warming, the planet quickly dropped back into a deep cold. Scientists can see this shift clearly in ice cores taken from Greenland and Antarctica. There is a thin, sharp line in the layers that marks the beginning of what they call the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden freezing that lasted more than 1,000 years. One idea says a comet or meteor broke apart in the sky and struck the ice sheets, setting off fires, floods, and a deep chill. Another idea says this was caused by a massive burst of glacial meltwater flowing into the North Atlantic Ocean. That sudden flow of fresh water may have disrupted the ocean currents that normally carry heat around the world. Whatever caused it, the Younger Dryas brought years of chaos. Temperatures fell, storms grew stronger, and sea levels changed rapidly. Entire regions that had been warming and melting suddenly froze again. People living through it would have seen coastlines shift, rivers overflow, and seasons that no longer followed any pattern they understood. The Bible talks about the fountains of the great deep bursting forth. For a long time, people thought that was just poetry, but modern science shows there is a huge amount of water trapped deep inside the Earth's mantle, maybe even more than all the water on the surface. If some of that deep water burst out during earthquakes or impacts, it could have flooded the land from below while rain poured from above. That may be why so many old stories describe the flood as coming from both the sky and the depths of the earth. Every fossil is a record of sudden change. When animals die, their bodies usually decay quickly. For a creature to become a fossil, it has to be buried almost instantly, trapped under mud or sand before it can rot away. That is why so many fossils show animals caught in motion, like fish in the middle of eating, dinosaurs locked together in combat, or mammals frozen while giving birth. These details show that many fossils were formed by sudden events, not slow and gentle ones. What's even more surprising is where these fossils are found. People sometimes find seashells high in the hills and wonder if the ocean once covered those peaks. Even the top of Mount Everest holds sea fossils, showing that the rock there was once part of the ocean floor. Tectonic movement explains some of this. Over millions of years, the movement of the Earth's crust lifts old sea floors into mountain ranges. But the huge number and widespread of these fossils suggest that something bigger and faster may have happened, a massive flood that covered large parts of the Earth. Even in modern times, water continues to remind us how powerful it is. In 1862, heavy rains turned California's Central Valley into an inland sea that lasted for months. In 1864, a dam failed in Sheffield, England, sending a wall of water rushing through the city and destroying everything in its path. In 1910, the Seine River flooded Paris so deeply that boats replaced carriages on the streets. And in 1919, in Boston, a massive storage tank burst and sent a wave of molasses flowing through the city, trapping homes and shops in a sticky flood. After every disaster, people marked high water lines, warned their children, and rebuilt higher than before. Floods have come and gone throughout history, but some evidence points to one that was far greater than the rest. A flood so massive it erased cities, split coastlines, and ended whole civilizations. If such a flood really happened, it would have changed everything, forcing survivors to rebuild from nothing. Maybe this was the disaster that reset human history, the moment when the old world was washed away and the new one began. The story of the Great Flood may be more than myth. It could be the memory of the day the world started over.